then you'll end up corrupting the dramatic essence of the play. The point when you're writing the play, for me, as the type of playwright that I am, is it needs to be driven from character and from the truth of the character. And if the pursuit of my own intellectual interests, refracted through the prism of what the character is, resonates with anybody else in any time or any context, and that's very happy and that's really exciting, but you can't engineer that. The idea of engineering it so it's relevant after the time of writing is totally beyond my or the playwright's control, really. Whether it's more relevant is, you know, I think there's some things in the play that are not necessarily drawn by historical or temporal or cultural context. People fall in love with people who don't fall in love with them. People feel lonely. The loneliness and sadness manifests itself often in anger. I was fascinated. I wrote 2 plays quite closely to one another. A play called Pornography, which quite directly in the heart of its play dramatised the experience of a bomber, of a suicide bomber, and then Punk Rock with William at the heart of the play. I was really fascinated by, you know, young boys of 17, 18, 19, 20 years old have always killed themselves. You know, right? It's a post-romantic thing. From Goethe's The Sorrows of Young Werther onwards, it's been a thing that a romantic, distraught young boy, Hamlet, you find it in Hamlet, you know? Young boys in despair have often killed themselves. What alarmed me about both the school shootings in the USA and the suicide bombings in London and the suicide attacks in New York was that now lonely, suicidal teenage boys were bringing down other people with them. And there are resonances between the attacks in Paris and the fictional attacks in Punk Rock. But I didn't aspire to that. I didn't try and write something that was relevant. I just tried to write William's story because I recognised myself in him, I think. Not because I want to kill people. You know, we all want to kill people a little bit. We all recognize that. Because I know what it's like to be lonely and to feel as though nobody really kind of gets you. Not now, but I remember that, you know. Really good question though, Jacob. Does it feel relevant to you?
Pardon?
Does William feel relevant to you?
I suppose so, yes, because there's just a potential chance that I could pull out a gun right now and kill everyone.
What?
Do you think there's more of a chance that you could do that now after the attacks in Paris than there was before the attacks in Paris?
No, not really. I think it's just more of an eye-opener, really, and what's happened with Paris, because people, obviously at the time, were more on the edge. Just like school trips, they've kind of had to explain that there's a chance of a terrorist attack. But like no one explained the chance how I could pull out a gun and shoot everyone now, like before the Paris attacks. But now I feel like it kind of fits nicely.
Yeah, very interesting. You know, those crimes like the Columbine massacre was a paradigm shifter for murder. You know, nobody had ever done that before, and then once somebody done it, it became something that could be done.
Sorry.
It happens every fucking month in America now. You know, we were rehearsing this in New York last year. It happened twice during the rehearsal period that kids took guns into school, and that is because, you know, once somebody's done it and it becomes something that people can do, the unimaginable becomes imaginable, becomes readily imaginable. So, you know, until the attacks... Hello?
I was going to say something, because we've read about the fact that it's quite a popular play in America. People have really taken to it and engaged with it, and we wondered why. Is that because of the relevance to them, possibly, with the gun laws and the shootings, or do we all just engage with it?
I think it reads in a very different way in the USA. I think in the USA it reads as... I think in the UK still, you know, until Jacob had a bad day today, it was nothing that had ever happened before in the UK. Yeah. I don't really think that, Jacob, by the way.
It's all right, Jack sat next to him, he can sort them out.
But in the USA, it's something that people recognise. I think, you know, it's really distressing. I found out, in in New Zealand and other countries which are liable for earthquakes, California and New Zealand I'm thinking of, primary school children have drills for earthquakes, yeah? In the way that you guys will have had fire drills when you're growing up. You had fire drills at your school when you're growing up, where you have to practice evacuating the school. In New Zealand and California, they practice for what happens in the event of an earthquake in a school, and they all kind of go under their desks and they all kind of hide under the door jamb. In schools in the USA now, people have lockdown drills for primary school kids.
We had a lockdown in couple.
About 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, we've got a sort of system in place where if we hear a certain number of bells, we know that someone's kind of on the premises, actually. Yeah, I know.
This is such a prime target.
Because we're near Birmingham, isn't it?
That's extraordinary.
Yeah.
I'm really sad now.
Sorry.
It's all right.
But yeah, it's becoming...
We can't spend 10 minutes on each question or we'll be here all day.
Well, should we skip to someone else's? Because I know Jake had 2 questions. Or should we... We're all about Jake today. Did you have 2? Yeah?
But we can let someone else do it.
Yeah, who else emailed a question?
I feel like it was my question, but you slightly edited it. I'm a bit offended, but I'll ask it anyway.
Do you want to wave so Sam can see you?
Oh, that's good.
Hello!
Hi. I was just going to ask if you had any advice for aspiring writers, because like I know a lot of I know a lot of writers like have a really like interesting background, and like obviously like you're from like quite an industrial like background, and like living in a place like Droitwich, there's not a lot that you can draw upon from like your really mundane day-to-day life that you can write about.
Is that my phone going here? Sorry. Yeah, I really do. I think I understand your anxiety about the notion that unless you've lived a life which is defined by quite extreme trauma that you can then draw on to give you material for lots of exciting stories and plays, unless you've lived that life, you're not qualified as a writer. I understand that anxiety, and I felt that anxiety growing up in Stockport in the 80s. With 2 parents who, to my frustration, were very happy with each other and in love with each other and stayed together, and neither of them hit each other. And I was actually in a kind of fairly kind of affluent, lower middle class family. I was quite happy and liked my brother and sister, and was never sexually abused or really kind of traumatised in any way. And there were times when I just thought, what the fuck am I going to write about? It was a really happy life. I had no stories to tell. I would say don't worry about that anxiety, because I find the notion that often comes in writers' workshops that you write about what you know really specious and thin. I think you can write about what you know, but I think if you only write about what you know, you'll only end up with self-indulgent autobiography. I think creativity comes from a synthesis of that which you experience, and that which you observe, and that which you research, and that which you imagine. So draw from all of those elements. Draw from the world that you imagine, draw from the world that you observe, draw from what you read about as well as what you live through, and find the synthesis of those things together. I think if you only are blessed with having been brought up in a kind of skint family with alcoholism, heroin abuse, and kind of like psychosexual violence as the defining tone of the family Sunday lunch, then you might be a good writer, but the likelihood is you won't. Writers are not born out of experience of trauma; they're born out of work. You become a writer by working. And if I have any advice to writers, it is make sure you write. One thing I would say to any group of young people that I speak to, you all have the potential to write significant work. You could all write the great defining novel of the next decade, or the next 2 decades, or the next century. You could all write the great plays of the next 30 years. You could all write poetry that will redefine the 21st century and allow the century to imagine itself in a different way. Every single person in that room has the potential to do that. None of you will do it unless you put a shift in. You've got to work. You've got to read. You've got to read seriously, and read not just as a fan, but as a thief. Read to steal. You've got to, if you're interested in writing for theatre, you've got to go to the theatre and think about how stages work and how theatre works. But you've got to work. You've really got to be writing every day. Make sure you're putting a shift in. If you do that, listen, it takes 10 years. It'll take you 10 years. There's that Malcolm Gladwell book, The Outliers, that describes the 10,000 hours that it takes for people to become experts at whatever they're doing. And it took me 10,000 hours. I started writing my first thing when I was, how old are you guys? Are you lower sixth or upper sixth? Or?
And year 11, so we're 15 to 18.
Okay, so I started writing when I was 17, when I was lower sixth, upper sixth, I think. And I had my first professional production when I was 27. Don't give up. Don't give up. Write because you want to write, not out of a sense of career. Don't write to be famous. Don't write to be a writer. It's a very seductive idea. Normally people want to write because they want to be writers, because writers have helped them live their lives. Don't write to be a writer. Write because you have something that you want to articulate. Not necessarily say. There might be a story you want to tell. There might be a tone you want to evoke. Write because you want to write, and never, 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 never stop. The day after you decide to stop will be the day that you would have made it if only you hadn't decided to stop. And being, intelligent 17, 16-year-olds, you'll be surrounded by parents and aunties and uncles and family who love you. And because they love you, they'll be worried about the financial consequence of you becoming a writer, because they don't want you penniless and kind of alcoholic and drug-addled. You have to ignore them and keep writing. Stop. Because I was at university with about 6 or 7 writers who wanted to be writers, and they were all as good, if not better than me, and I'm the only one who is still writing now, and that was because I was idiotic enough to not stop. So don't stop.
That's amazing. Oh, some Monday morning inspiration. Who else has got one of those brilliant questions? Got anything about punk rock potentially, or?
Catherine's got one.
Catherine's got one. Wave.
Hello.
Were you ever worried about writing about controversial issues and how might they be taken by the audience? And if you were worried, how did you get around it?
Not really. I quite like, the type of art that I like, the type of music that I like, the type of films that I like, the type of plays that I like, tend to be plays or films or novels or music that is quite dark or quite difficult, and some people, and it's not to the palate, it's not to the taste of everybody. My favourite music is not to everybody's taste. My favourite films, not everybody's like, but they're art and music and films and plays that redefine my sense of self. They make me feel less lonely in a world which is quite isolating. Sometimes you need to really go to quite dark places, to be honest. And I'm more inspired and uplifted in the end by honesty than I am by a gesture of being gentle. I find a lot of shows that people claim are uplifting really depressing because they feel dishonest. So I never tried to be controversial. I never tried to court controversy. And I've written some scenes in some plays that people find upsetting. And people walk out of, people have always walked out of my plays. And that's fine. It's better for them to walk out if they're unhappy. It's better that people walk out because you can feel the energy of people in a theatre. If you're sitting next to somebody who really hates the play that you're watching, you can feel the vibe from them. It's much better that they leave. We had somebody, we've got Herons on at the moment at the Lyric here in Hammersmith, which is where I'm speaking to you from. We had somebody the other night call out from the circle when the play finished. They called out "sickos." And, that's fine. They're right. We are. Well, Herons wasn't written in an attempt to be controversial. It was written in an attempt to be honest. And when we kind of live in a culture which is defined by violence or brutality or extremity of behaviour, I think it's beholden to artists to be honest about that. If some people find that unpalatable, the only thing I can do is really check with myself. Am I being honest or am I deliberately being controversial? And if I'm deliberately being controversial, then I hope I will change it. If I'm being honest, then I think it just needs to hold tight, I think.
Thank you. I think that's really relevant because our Year 13s are doing their devised work, their units, and I think that's been an issue, hasn't it? Because it can become controversial and it can become kind of raw and potentially upsetting. And we've kind of had that discussion, haven't we? Like, do we push it? Do we hold it back? Do we? So that's really useful, actually. Thank you.
I think you've got to police yourself to make sure you're not being controversial because being controversial is sexy.
Yes.
You know, make sure you're being honest. And also, it's not a stupid idea to think to a degree about your audience and the conversation you're having with the audience. I think about the audience all the time when I'm writing. I think about the impact I want to have on them, what I want to do to the audience. And in order to really do that, you need to think intelligently about who the audience is. There are certain gestures in some of my plays. So, for example, in London theatre, the Royal Court Theatre is traditionally one of the most challenging or provocative theatres in post-war British theatre. So a gesture that's provocative in the Royal Court will resonate very differently to one that's, say, staged at the theatre in Birmingham. Is it the Theatre Royal in Birmingham? No, it's not, is it? What's the bloody...
Birmingham Rep? The Rep?
We've got the Rep, we've got the Hippodrome, we've got the...
Yeah, Birmingham Rep, yeah. You know, the type of thing you can put on the theatre upstairs in the Royal Court is very different to the type of thing you put on the main stage of the Birmingham Rep. And to not think about that would be naive. So think about your audience, think about telling the truth. Don't be controversial for the sake of controversy, but don't be afraid if people are upset by what you're doing, if what you're doing comes from telling the truth.
Amazing, thank you.
It's all right.
Well, Simon, which questions did you like? Should we go with...
There was one really good one that I've never been asked.
Oh.
It was, which was really good. I like it if you had to live as one of your characters that you've created, which one would it be?
That's the one I was just looking at. Was that you, Jay?
Yeah.
Oh my God, you're wild.
Oh, Jay, man, you're having a good day, mate.
Yay, he's not going to kill us all.
That was really great. I really like that question. And then I started thinking about my characters and thinking so many of them have really shit lives. I wouldn't want... all of the characters, you know, I'm really present in every single one of them. So there's a lot of me in William Carlyle. There's a lot of me in the bomber in pornography. Or the women characters, you know, the kind of 80-year-old woman at the end of pornography. There's a lot of there's in every character I create, to a degree, it's me imagining what I would do in that situation. If I was an 80-year-old woman whose husband had died and was marginalised by the university that I'd given my life to, what would I do? If I was a kind of 17-year-old schoolboy with access to a handgun, what would I do? You know, so there's me. I'm present in a lot of them. There are some characters, though, who are quite often the peripheral characters in my plays, who are the characters I quite admire. Like I love Tanya Gleason in punk rock. I think she's a real moral hero. I think the capacity to just be kind in a culture which renders kindness difficult is really heroic. Isaac Berg in Blindsided as well, who's somebody who just tries to be good. I'd aspire to being like them. I probably quite like the money that Paul out of Birdland's got. But then it's not his, so I don't know. I think the character who's closest to me, of all the characters I've written, is probably Alex in Seawall. I don't know if you know that monologue. But that's quite close to my autobiography. Are we doing for time? What time does your lesson finish?
I've lost all sense of space and time. 20 minutes. Would you be right if we did like one more question? Would that be okay?
Yeah, I can do one more.
Amazing.
Do two more if somebody. I'd hate people to be frustrated.
Who wants to go for it? Because you guys wrote them.
Or has anyone got any questions that aren't on the list but you've got one? Katie?
Hang on. Let me find
Hang
you
on.
there.
Wait. In punk rock, I think it's the last scene where it's William and it's like you just think, oh, is he in purgatory or is it just genuinely is he being?
Is it a genuine mental hospital? Yeah.
Yeah. What is it?
Yeah. Like, is it genuinely just a mental hospital or is it like a metaphor for purgatory?
It's a very interesting question. I think, and also it speaks to something quite interesting about the relationship between the playwright and her or his work. Because we don't always know the right answers to that. And our relationship to our work isn't necessarily, it's not like a novelist's work. When a novelist writes a novel, they have total ownership of the experience of receiving that. When one writes a play, you write a play with the understanding that the experience of receiving the play will be mediated through the collaboration of many other people, of the director, of the architecture of the theatre, of the artistic team, the designers, the lighting designer, sound designer, the actors, and then even of the audience as well, and that's the gesture of playwriting. So subsequently, I always say, I'm not necessarily the right answer, and your answer as a reader, as a potential director or actor or audience member might be more interesting than mine. You know, you might have it right. I can honestly say, in the time of writing that scene, which was written in 2008, so it was written 7 years ago, in the time of writing that scene, for me, it was a hospital he was in. It was important to me that he hadn't killed himself, because it was important to me to an extent that he was kind of held to judgment, but also in so doing, the adults that failed to surround him, because the only time in that play that an adult arrives on stage, the adults that failed to surround him were also held up to judgment and confronted with the consequences of the cultures that they created. You know, punk rock is one of a series of plays that I've written which put young people at the heart of the plays. And this partly comes out of the experience of being a parent, and partly comes out of the experience of being a teacher, having been a school teacher and continuing to work with young people quite a lot. And partly comes out of the experience of my own memories as a teenager. But I think politically comes from a notion I've observed in British culture over the past kind of 15 years, is that there's this cultural moment where adults are afraid of young people. And I think that's as wrong as it's possible to get. It's wrong that adults should be nervous about walking on the same side of the street as a group of young people. Our responsibility should be to engage with them, to nurture them, to look after them, to inspire them, to galvanise them, not to demonise them. And so sitting on the punk rock and herons and mourning and other plays is a gesture to try to celebrate the humanity of those people. And putting Richard Harvey in that scene was an attempt to have him confront the fact that William is the same age as his daughter, the fact that, to a degree, he's William's parent, not biologically, but culturally. It's all right.
You are just blowing our minds today. Thank you.
Wish we could do our
Any other questions? I think.
Yeah. It looks like Jacob has one. Can you read it or not? One more question for you.
Come on, Jay, you're the man today.
This one's slightly selfish because it's going to help me with my coursework. But what was the point of Bennett's sister?
Yeah.
What question? Bennett's sister, I hate it. I hate productions that cut Bennett's sister. Not really. I don't really. But you know, I don't hate any productions. I think Bennett's sister is really fundamental, because you get this one moment where you see Bennett as a child more clearly than anything else. You know, we all, as young people, all of us to an extent throughout our lives, but as young people especially, we're defined by the personas we kind of construct for ourselves. You'll know this experience. You know, the kind of person you're speaking to on Skype now behaves very differently talking to a group of sixth formers and year 11 students than I did in the meeting I was just in, and that I did this morning when I was getting my daughter to school, or when I was getting my sons up, or, you know, when I was watching Man United beat Liverpool yesterday. I was a very different person in all of those different environments. I think schools are places where we are paralysed by the personas we assimilate. And Bennett is paralysed by the persona he's constructed for himself as the swaggering cocksure, kind of like shit, you know, the bully, So what Lucy does is she comes in and she punctures that completely, and we see Brother Bennett as the caring big brother with a little sister who's a little bit frightened of the dentist and who has a mum. You know, quite often sixth form, when you're 15, 16, 17, 18, our defining impulse is to kind of pretend that our parents don't exist. I speak as a parent of a 17-year-old and a 14-year-old. There's something excruciating about the fact that we have that biological genetic background to carry around with us. And Lucy's a really beautiful reminder of that background in Bennett, I think. I love that moment. And I love that he's gracious to her. I think that's really important, that he looks after her. I think he really, really, really loves her.
Oh, I think
It's about punk rock.
one of our teachers has a final question. Is that okay?
Oh, is it? I feel like it has to be a really good question now, and it's not that good. But would William have killed Chadwick and Tanya if they'd stayed in the room? Or would he have killed Chadwick?
I don't know who asked me that question, but it's quite an interesting question. Although whoever asked it to me, it was complicated because the microphone wasn't pointing towards you, so I didn't hear it.
Oh.
You're saying, would William have killed Chadwick and Tanya if they'd stayed in the room?
Yes.
Yeah. In the very, very, very first draft, he killed Chadwick. In a draft that was never made public and that was never performed, and we did a reading of it, and the director suggested to me that Chadwick should survive, partly because of the heroism of Chadwick's survival, but also because there's something in the metabolism of the play which is about burning three things. That starts off with Bennett burning smoking three cigarettes on the bus, on the top deck, and ends with William getting 3 cigarettes in the hospital. That you're burning 3 things. And she was quite excited by the idea that the 3 people that William kills were the equivalent to Bennett's 3 cigarettes on the top deck of the bus. So she thought there should be 3 people killed, and that there would be a heroism to Chadwick escaping that actually William would enjoy. And I was really excited by that note. In no draft has he ever killed Tanya, and Tanya stays in the room with him, and I think there's bullets in the gun for her. But I think he recognises Tanya as being a force of goodness in the world.
But is Chadwick not a force of goodness? Is Chadwick not good as well?
That is a really good question, and there's part of me that thinks it's not a question for me to answer. I think every different reader of the play will have a different relationship to Chadwick, and every director and every audience member will have a different relationship to Chadwick. I think Nicholas is good in a way, you know. It's not a question about whether these people are good. The thing about that play that I didn't really notice until we were rehearsing it, but alarms me every time I see it performed, is the top of scene 6, the top of the killing scene, incrementally there's moments of redemption for every single one of those characters just on the cusp of their execution. So for me, Bennett is really close to coming out to Nicholas and having Nicholas accept him and just kind of say, it's all right, I'm not gay, Bennett, but it's fine, really, really close to that. And Sissy is really close to accepting the truth that Tanya confronts her with, that she is defined by Stockport as much as she's paralysed by it. She's quite close to that. All the characters have a moment of clarity, and then William executes. I don't know what that says about. I went to see Herons with my 17-year-old on Saturday night, and I wrote it when he was 2. It's actually originally written for him. If you look at the dedication of Herons, it's dedicated to my son. I sat next to him and I turned to him at the end and said, "What do you think?" He said, "Well, all my life people have been telling me what a sick imagination you've got." I always kind of didn't believe them, but now I'm starting to think they were right. I think all of the characters in Punk Rock are good. I think it's the difference between, because I think every character I've written is good, because I don't believe in evil. I think William's good. I don't believe that there are good people and bad people in the world to a degree. I think notions of whether somebody is good or not are limited, and I think it's in that moment does William perceive them as being good. And I think in that moment William perceives Chadwick as having capacity for admirable defiance, and always perceives Tanya as being benign.
Well, we've got 5 minutes before the bell goes, so can everyone please say an enormous thank you to Simon for doing this, because that was phenomenal.
Really nice to speak to you. I hope I get to see you in real life one day.
Oh.
That would be amazing. We'll come and see her instantly.
Skype, who's meant to hang off first, so...
Well, I'll do it, that's fine.
Thank you so much. Woo!
See you later.